Later on this evening will be our 150th of these Spark Lab events. And so it's my great privilege to introduce the speaker today. But before I do that, let me just give you a little bit of context as to what this is about this morning, and indeed what Spark Lab is about. Because Spark Lab is something that began in January of last year. And it came around an idea that was Spark looking to unleash the potential in all New Zealanders. Now that's a lovely statement, and the way that we describe that is you would have seen statements like that before. You can see them in PowerPoint presentations, a number of companies that talk about doing lovely, worthy things like that. But I personally haven't been around an organisation that's had as much commitment and tenacity to see through that vision as what Spark has done, witnessed by 150 of these events, all free of charge, all designed around what we call communities of interest. And they started last year around things like fashion and film and music and art, where we invited a group of people together and we'd put on an amazing speaker. There'd be Q&A off the back of it. And what we started noticing was that there was connections and networking going on in the room that we didn't really expect might happen. And during that process, someone said to us, look, these are really interesting around topics like film, fashion, music, art. But we don't seem to have this thing for business. And part of the observations that would play back is, as business owners or managers or leaders, actually it can be a reasonably lonely existence because we don't get the opportunity to ask questions that perhaps we don't want to ask our peers or our friends, our family, our neighbours. So why don't you go about creating a series that's designed to help business people connect? And that's exactly what we've done this year. And it started with themes like Startup Month, Innovation Month, Disruption Month. And the way it works is we take a theme that on the surface of it looks sort of ethereal, like Disruption Month, one of those words that you hear a lot about, and you often read them as if it's a Silicon Valley startup type mentality. And what we try and do is bust that myth by saying, if you took a topic like that, what are some practical tools and tips and advice that you could do in your business on Tuesday in New Zealand on a cold winter's morning? So we're looking for those opportunities to help give some practical use to them. This is our first Spark Lab outside of Auckland. Very appropriate for us to pick Hamilton first, and very appropriate to be in a room such as this, the Bill Gallagher room, for very obvious reasons around a theme like we have today. So the way that Spark Lab works, to describe it, and we sort of introduce it as what it's not, and it's not a Rotary meeting. And I say that with love and respect to the Rotarians in the room, but what I mean by that is it's not sort of a polite sit there, listen to a speaker, have another muffin and leave. It's based on Q&A and debate. So we would love you to put up your hand and interject, or what you have the opportunity on the Mobi site that you use to come in with is you can send your questions through to me, and then I'll do the interjecting, interrupting for Sir Ray this morning. It also, on your Mobi site, gives you the ability to find out who else is in the room. And the reason we did that is, again, come from the insight that says Kiwis, as a rule, don't seem to be very good at networking. It's sort of awkward. The Americans seem to be fantastic at it. We don't really like doing the old, hi, my name is. So it's a very safe way to do it. By clicking a button, which is find people, it will bring up a list of everyone that's in the room, and then you can connect them by dropping them an email, all from the safety of your site, should you want to do that. At the end of this morning's talk, there'll be the facilities, teas and coffees to remain on again, so you can meet some of the others in the room. From a health and safety perspective, there are fire exits behind, to the side, and directly behind us, and there's a little assembly point in the pathway in through here. So, to get to the reason we're here this morning, and it's not very often you get to introduce someone with a pedigree that reads like this. So Ray Avery is a successful businessman, scientist, innovator, social entrepreneur, and author. Not really much that's not on that list, you might say. So Ray's groundbreaking work in the developing world has brought him respect from his peers and his fans and advocates throughout the world. So if I use a couple of these examples, so Ray developed a low-cost infant incubator designed for use in the developing world. He was part of the team developing the intraocular lens laboratories in Nepal. His work has been recognised by the Rotary Paul Harris Medal, the Bauer Research and Develop Innovative Award in 2008. Sir Ray was a world-class New Zealander for biotechnology in 2009. He was the TBWA Disruption Award in 2010. He's the Kiwi Bank New Zealander of the Year in 2010 and the Blake Leadership Medal in 2010 also. In 2011, Sir Ray was awarded the New Zealand Order of Merit and Knight the Grand Companion. So we're an esteemed company this morning, less about Sir Ray's achievements, so what I think you're going to find interesting this morning is Sir Ray's incredible story. So without further ado, it's my great privilege to introduce Sir Ray Avery. So in the spirit of getting things underway, Sir Ray, and I mentioned questions, and that's the way that this morning's going to work. And I said to Sir Ray, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask the audience. And Sir Ray related a story that he did a talk to a group of 5-year-olds. And having finished the talk, he said, now any questions? And the first question was, why do you have a beard? So I'm hoping we can push through that level of sort of personal introductions. But let us start with your story, Sir Ray, because for those that have read your incredible book, they'll know that yours is not an upbringing like many of us in the room. So if we might start right back there to where it all began.
Well, I guess I was lucky in that I had a shocking childhood. And it was lucky because education, I think, sometimes stymies creativity, but I managed to circumvent that because I was brought up in orphanages in the UK, and these were terrible places. Poorly run. There were about 500,000 kids in southern England because of the bombing, and they sent me to school, and I needed glasses because I was short-sighted, and nobody gave me glasses, so I couldn't see what was on the board. I had acute glue ear because of the poor living conditions, so I couldn't hear what they were saying. So basically, I had no idea what they were doing at the front of the class, and they were just doing some sort of miming stuff. And so when they asked me a question, I couldn't answer it. So clearly I was retarded, so they put me to the back of the class. And that was brilliant, because that was the real defining thing that I have that you've all got but very seldom use, and that is the power of observation, because that's all I had. And every single invention that you can think of in the world comes from one person seeing something that is there for everybody to see, and that person sees it. So whether it's looking down a microscope and seeing penicillin, mould growing up against this, bugs growing up against this mould called penicillin, or people just seeing something, what seems ordinary, but then they take that application and make it into something successful. So I was lucky because I didn't have all of that. And the other thing that I had was I ran away from the orphanages to get away from all these terrible things. And so to keep warm, I'd go to the library and read the Encyclopedia Britannica, because that was the Google of the day. So my knowledge base is quite diverse, so I know what Avogadro's number is, and I know what pH is, and I know a whole range of different things. And the more disparate your knowledge is, the more likely you are to come up with a clever idea. The next best thing to do that is, of course, the power of us, because there's not one single person in this room who's as clever as all of us. And if you can build great teams, then you can actually achieve, great things. So you've got to have these tools of innovation. And I was blessed because they were forced on me, really. But also, if you think about your life, if that was the worst that the world could throw at me, being abused and beaten up in orphanages, once I got out of there, I just wanted to do great things because I could. And I wasn't frightened. Because most of the bad things, touch wood, that could happen to one in life has already happened to me. And fear actually is one of the things that stops us doing things. And what I found out very early on is fear is just a myth, because you're frightened of something that might happen. It hasn't happened. So if a bear's coming running to you in the bush and you're frightened, you can either stand there and get eaten, or you can run away and get eaten, or you can snot him in the nose because you've got a bit of a chance. So it's about not being frightened. So I was lucky. I had an education that wasn't stymied by the education process.
So you talk a little bit about, so you come out of the orphanages, you have done an incredible element of reading, Encyclopedia Britannicas. How does it play out from there? What's the first opportunity for you to start applying some of those learnings?
Well, I was lucky in that two things happened. One was I realised that once I ran away from the orphanages, I set up shop under a railway bridge in London. And I lived there for about a year. And it was brilliant because I could go to the Tate Art Gallery and look at what was going on there. I could go to the library. But I got my leg cut, and I woke up in a hospital with sepsis. And this teacher was there, and he was a social worker. And he got me a job at Agricultural Research College, which was run by career academics. They were all lords of the land. They all had country estates and so on. And they started to educate me, not only just in science, but in giving me an education that's given to very few people. So these were landed gentry. So they said, "Good Lord, Ray, you can't talk properly. No idea what breed to order with which wine. We're going to have to educate you." And so they did. And that was my first thing in life. This was when I was 14 years old, and I just started there. I had my first plan. You've got to have a plan in life. You've got to have a plan. I've got about 4,725 days left to live, and I know what I'm going to do with them. You guys have got no idea, do you? No, not a chance. You were born with about 30,000 days. That's all you got. And if you have a plan, you'll be more successful than all of your contemporaries because they ain't got a plan. So my first 10-year plan, you don't have to get it right. Just by having a plan, it means that you dream really, really big and you think, what am I going to be doing in 10 years' time? What would I like to be doing? You set a plan, and in doing so, of course, you set objectives. And if you don't do that, you haven't got objectives. You go to a conference like this, meet somebody from Canterbury and end up living in Canterbury just because that's what happens. But if you have a plan, you make sure that everything fits on the line of where you're going. So my first plan, which wasn't necessarily terribly successful, was to be a millionaire by the time I was 26. And I managed to crack that one. And the other one was to be loved by as many women as possible. And I cracked that one. But what I wanted was to be loved, because I hadn't been loved at all in my life. I didn't have any siblings, and I didn't know what love was about. So I thought if everybody loved me, I'd be really, really happy. That turned out to be a real disaster, because I ended up having a bunch of girlfriends in London, a bunch in Canterbury, half people in London and Dover, and a bunch in Dover. And I had a character flaw, which was I didn't like acrimony. I didn't like people crying. So I never broke up with any of them. You do that for a decade, you've got a serious problem. And that's what happened. So, but fortunately, I came off my motorbike and broke every single bone in the left-hand side of my body and woke up in hospital. I was there for 6 weeks, and that was enough time for all those women to find me at the same time. They weren't happy. I left for New Zealand. No, I didn't. I actually was running away from myself. So my first 10-year plan didn't work, but I learned a lot from that. I learned certainly how to make money. And I think the thing about life is that sometimes in startup companies and venture companies, investors won't lend money to a company that hasn't failed. Failure for successful people is just part of the whole learning process. I'd like to say that failure is just a cul-de-sac on the way to success for successful people. And you learn stuff as long as you learn from it and don't repeat those mistakes. So, and sometimes it's a way of looking at things. Because I remember when I first started to make my small fortune in the UK, I was sent to London to set up a laboratory to do analytical testing by the company I was working for. And it was a virtual laboratory, and I used my credit card to set up all the stationery and rented the office. And what we're going to do is take samples from the Greater London Borough of Camden and send them down to Canterbury for analysis. And when my boss was driving up to see how the office was going, he was killed. And so I had no job, and I had a credit card maxed out and no way of getting that redeemed because the company went into liquidation because the family were fighting over the company. And so if you look at that moment in time, it looked like it was all over. But if you turn that on its head and look at it in another way, what I saw was that all I was doing was setting up a virtual laboratory to take samples from the government establishments and private industry, take them to a laboratory and get them analysed. So why couldn't I do that? So I just changed the name of the company and started to do that. And within about 3 years, I owned the company that we're doing the contract manufacturing. And then finally, I ended up owning these 3 laboratories. But I worked from 7 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock at night. Well, probably about 11 o'clock at night. That's where the women came in, because the only place you could get something to eat after 11 o'clock was at a disco. So it was all almost doomed, anyway. So, but what I learned from that was later came into being when I came to New Zealand about how to build teams of people. Because I understood what I was trying to do with those young ladies in terms of finding a family.
And what brought you to New Zealand?
But I ran out of land. I was travelling overland to find myself, and I went through all the good countries like Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, and for the first time in my life I saw abject poverty, and I didn't know what to do about it, but it certainly had a profound effect on me. And I arrived in New Zealand in 1973 and found home, because New Zealand is a very unique country. They say that you should never write about a country after a week of arrival because you stop seeing it. That observation stuff stops. We're almost pre-programmed to stop thinking once we get into a routine. Once you know where the dairy is, you just walk there. Sometimes you don't even know how you got there. You drive to work, you don't know how you got there. But if you're awake all the time, you're more likely to see something on the way to the dairy that might be interesting that you can adapt for some technology or something like that. So I arrived in New Zealand and found home because New Zealanders have characteristics that don't exist anywhere else in the world. And my osmosis into becoming a Kiwi was very sequential because, New Zealanders are different and they're not fond of rules. And when I'm talking to large audiences and I say, and a good example of that is hands up in the audience, anybody who hasn't got a permit for their deck, and because it's about 1 metre, that'll be fine, And we do, just, I'll make a window there, that'll be fine, But what happened to me was I came from this very regimed country, England, and I came to New Zealand and I bought houses in Mount Eden. There was a whole, escalation in prices overnight. Nothing's changed. And I bought this villa and it had a lava flow going through the basement. So I decided to dig it out. And I used a Kango hammer to do that, and that just kept jammed in the mountain. So I finally got one of those big green things, those pneumatic ones, and that saved the day. Not that I used it, but Jack, my friend across the road, came across and said, "What are you trying to do?" I said, "I'm trying to dig out the basement, put in a 4-car garage." He said, "You won't do it like that, mate." So I know now. Anyway, I went across to his place, and it was like a square of the mountain all gone, like a piece of butter, just no tool marks, just the mountain gone. I said, "That's exactly what I want to do." "How'd you do that?" "Dynamite." I said, "Isn't that dangerous?" He said, "No, soft charge." Mum was upstairs, that's his wife, doing the washing up. A few floorboards popped up, nails popped up. She complained about slippers getting sloughed. I banged them down, all sweet, I'll do your place. And he did. But he didn't like his wife much. He would come across the next weekend and say, "You got a great view of Mount Eden, you get rid of that macrocarpa." I said, "I've got a chainsaw." He said, "I have." He used to be the chief dynamiter at the Thames gold mine, deaf as a post, but he didn't like his wife much, so every weekend he'd come over. And he produced this chainsaw and decided to boil this tree. It didn't have a blade in it, I'm sure. Just steam was coming out of this tree. And he said, "You hold the rope at the top of the tree, and when I say pull, you pull." And then there was this twisting, cracking sound. He goes, "Run!" When I came to, all I could see was this big plume of blue two-stroke, and the chainsaw was going full tit, and this cigarette pulsing in the corner of his mouth, which I never saw him take out in the 10 years that I knew him before he died. And those wonderful Kiwi words as he leant down and stooped down and he said, "Don't worry, mate, I'll cut you out." The problem with that is you guys are nuts, and so, but if you spend enough time with people like that, you become nuts too, So it was a few years later when somebody came to me and said, "Would you like to set up the Department of Clinical Pharmacology at the Auckland Medical School?" And I had no knowledge of making pharmaceuticals or pharmacology, but I've been in New Zealand for about 18 months, so I said, "Okay," because that's what we do. The second rule that we have is that we have no respect for the status quo. Just because we don't know something doesn't mean we won't give it a go. And that's quite unique on the world stage. People like Bill Buckley, for instance. Who's heard of Bill Buckley? Okay. Bill Buckley, somebody went to him and said, "We want you to make the biggest machine that nukes up chips and with photon displays, and these electromagnets are the size of a suitcase. I want you to make me one the size of this room." He said, "Okay," because that's what we do. And the rest is history. He makes 90% of the machines that fire up all the chips for all the photon displays everywhere in the world. It shouldn't happen, but he's got no boundaries, you see, and that's what makes New Zealanders different. So for me, I started to become a Kiwi and think like a Kiwi. And the third rule of being a Kiwi is daring to dream. We do dream really, 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 really big. And we shouldn't do a lot of things. We shouldn't win the World Cup. Demographically, we shouldn't win the World Cup because we've only got 1 million able-bodied men that can actually play a game. And in Europe, there would be 200 times that amount. But we win because they play as a team. And if you want to have a successful business, you need to build successful teams. Because if one of them acted like an individual and tried to go all the time for the goal, they wouldn't win. But they pass to each other because they want to win as a team. And we're not programmed to do that. We're actually educated to act as individuals. And that's where we go wrong sometimes. We've got to change the way that we think in terms of building teams of people. That's the power of us. There's nobody in this room that's cleverer than all of us. And if we can get all of that intelligence together, and indeed that's one of the reasons for the Spark Talks, is to get people talking. Because most innovation comes about through one person talking to somebody else. If you think about the names that are on the billboards of large companies, it's not usually one guy. It might be Smith & Co. or whatever. So there's usually a number of people involved, and you don't all have the same skill set, so you need a range of people in a business to do that. But you've got to actually start thinking about the people you work with as a family. And that's what I learned when I went to work for Douglas Pharmaceuticals. If you were sitting at the end of the table when you joined the company, I'd have said, I'm the CEO of Douglas Technical Division, and I'm Dad, and your job is to look after me. And you're all my children, and my job is to look after you. And your job is to look after each other. And if any one of you siblings start to squabble amongst each other and show off and show how clever you are, you'll hear all the other ones put their hands in the air and start whistling like Superman, because you think you're Superman. You're not, but we are. And that's why we were able to overwhelm the might of the multinational drug companies and take over all the manufacturing of those companies over about a 10-year period of time, because we actually acted like an unassailable team. And that's a very powerful thing. That's one of the most powerful tools that you've got. And unfortunately, we often, when the larger the company, the more we actually break up those teams into smaller groups of people that become different countries. So you've got production, quality assurance, they hate each other. Pretty much everybody hates accounts. And so you do all of that stuff. But if you break through that and actually, you can do simple things like get them to have darts tournaments at lunchtime between all of the people. And everybody likes to have a go at throwing darts at the accounts people, you know. And before you know it, though, they actually break through and start acting like friends. And that changes things. It changes how business can run. So I've learned a whole lot of tools in setting up these companies in terms of what makes them successful. But none of that's any good if you get the basic rules of innovation wrong, and that is being very customer-centric rather than product-centric.
Let's pick that up, Sir Ray, because you make a point about the power of observation and a general empathy to want to understand people. Why is it that we fall out of practice in doing that, almost as if muscle memory takes us back to routine? Why do you think that is?
Well, it's profoundly problematic in that all of you were born innovators, absolutely born innovators, but you educated out of you pretty much. If you go to see kids at preschool, they can open all the drawers at preschool and they can take anything out and play with them, right? And, you know, if you look at the number of kids that invented stuff, the number of kids under the age of 5, you'd be surprised. One girl got her mother's spray bottle for moisturising rubber plants, stuck a balloon on it, and she was the first one to make a water balloon pump machine, sold it to Mattel for $1 million. So kids are naturally innovative. So what happens, though, is that when you go to proper school, you get unified. You actually physically get unified. You get standardised. And then we start measuring you against a metric. The whole idea of education was predicated to meet the needs of the Industrial Revolution. It hasn't changed. All the curriculums that you see around the world have maths, literature, and those kind of things right at the top of the queue, but right at the bottom, creativity? Nah, nada, nothing. So you might get music or you might get dance, but that's about as creative. But because that metric that we use now, the NZCE or whatever it is, we standardise people's education so they're a standardised process box that fits through a standard letterbox. No creativity, no education about team building or imagination. Einstein said, if you want your kids to be intelligent, read them fairy stories. And what he was really saying is, let them use their imagination and let them be kids. But we educate that out of them. In fact, that metric now is so profound that that's the goal. And you're measured by that goal day one. So you are either good or bad according to something that was there ready to give a barometer of how we were educating you. And what should happen in real life in those kind of situations is that when you don't perform against that metric, we should give you help. But we actually don't. What we do is we just say, well, you haven't met the standard, and so you can't go to university, I'm sorry. And so all of your creativity and the social dysfunctionality of our society is predicated in those education systems, because you're all now competing against each other for that metric, to meet that metric. You want to be number one. There's no team building in that. And that starts off when you start your new job. So you're fighting against your contemporaries. And so you've got to relearn all of that stuff and say that's because the world is not a good place because of all of this. You know, we wouldn't have ISIS and all these terrible things if people actually saw that the goal is for us to be successful, for us as a group of people to be successful. We wouldn't have the second, the halt and the lame in developing countries if we actually felt that. And success often for us in the first world is how much money you can make in the car that you got parked in the driveway and how big your house is. And we've started that through that education system. So, but in companies, what you can do is you can break through that and say, we're going to be a family, we're going to act differently, and we're going to actually make a team that's unassailable. And if everybody believes that, you can achieve huge things. But you need to do that, you need to have a good leader to do that in the company who has vision, has a dream. So he's got a plan, and he takes everybody along that plan, and then he actually starts to implement products that are customer-centric and also that hopefully do something that's good for us and our planet.
So often we hear about innovative companies that have a 35 checkbox gate system that says we pride ourselves on thinking differently as long as you comply to 35 boxes to tick. Yeah. But what you're talking about is almost a childlike curiosity of exploring and iterating and making things. They almost seem diametrically opposed, though. So how do you encourage us create this culture of creativity and curiosity in a company?
Well, I think you're quite right. There's two elements to it. One is you have to have structure, because everybody has to know what they're going to do, and you have to have metrics around that to see how effective people are. But the metric shouldn't be the goal. The metric is just exactly that, to see how somebody needs to have some additional training to perform. So you look after them just like you would your child, and you promote people from within. But the other thing that happens with our society is that the very nature of the buildings that we make, because I'm an observer, so I just watch what's happening in life. The very nature of the buildings that we design were really predicated on that Industrial Revolution model. So they're boxes for people to sit and work in with a little desk. If you go to Google, you won't see a desk anywhere. If you go to every creative agency in New Zealand, probably yours as well, there's people with pinball machines in the corner, and they've got tennis balls that they're bouncing. Some guy's strumming a musical instrument in the corner, because they're creative people and they're allowed to have creative thoughts. And out of that space, now I'm not suggesting that when you've got a CNC machine working in a corner, there's a guy with a banjo next to it. There might be some health and safety issues there, and the odd electrocution. But the point is that you can, that's what we do. We try and make the downtime. So when it's lunchtime, you can have a bunch of guys. If you leave people to their natural resources in a big factory, you'll see all of the blue-collar guys sitting in one set of tables, and all of the suits in another set of the table, and then accounts, they're not even in the room. But they've got all these different segregated people, right? And they don't talk to each other. But if you make something that makes them like an indoor cricket game, or, we found darts has been fantastic, because people like to be competitive, blokes like to be competitive, and they start talking to each other. Before you know it, they start acting like a family. And so instead of having that division between the organisation's subgroups, they start understanding. And sometimes we would swap people from different jobs so they understood their job, so they'd know why they're complaining about that quality issue. So you have standard operating procedures. We actually have standard operating procedures for everything. So there's a structure of what you do. But even in those, we have incorporated human things. So with health and safety, for instance, you can have don't stick your finger into the electrical socket, because and if you write that down, it's pretty boring. So we do graphics of things that show things that you shouldn't do, and every time you see them, it makes you laugh, and so therefore by that you get recognition, and people are more likely to remember something by these things being around the factory. And it might be a sign that simply says, "Don't let, I wonder what this does," be your last words. But people remember that about, and so there's a lot of things that we do, but we have fun. If you want to have a good business, you have to love what you do. And if you can get people around you that love what they do, you've got an unassailable force that can do anything. Unfortunately, if you don't have those dynamics, when the going gets tough, and all companies go through these different bell curves that have cash flow or production problems, and if you have a great team around you, they'll support you through those difficult times. But if you haven't got a good team, then everybody's going to walk off and you'll spend all your time doing HR consulting. So it also makes good business sense to work together and look after each other.
Can I just pick this point up, Ray? Because, You know, most business and industries will read about categories being disrupted, where technology is coming and it's automating and replacing jobs, and revenue curves are getting mature, if not in decline. So notionally, we buy this idea of innovation because we have to. But when you start talking about darts and indoor cricket and playing with things, there can be a mindset that says, but you don't understand, Ray, we've got a growing-up business, and we've got to do things in a certain way because health, compliance, and so forth. But you work in pharmaceuticals, and you work in pharmaceuticals in third world countries. So arguably, if there was ever a need to be a growing-up, serious person, it's in pharmaceuticals. But you don't, I mean, I'm sure you do that, but you still encourage this family play sense.
Well, we encourage creativity within the framework of, there's a whole lot of, arguably the pharmaceutical industry is one of the most regulated in the world next to the aircraft industry. And so everybody has to follow the rules of production, and we've made it easier in terms of people understanding where they are. So people working in different areas in pharmaceutical plants have different colour clothing on, for instance. So if they wander into the wrong area, you'll know they're in the wrong area because they've got the wrong clothes on. So you can use a whole lot of supporting things that are still kind of family orientated rather than an SOP that's dead. What I'm trying to do is make a human environment that people talk to each other and share ideas. If you don't do that, the larger question, though, to answer your question, the larger issue is that all this can be worth nothing if you don't actually start looking at innovation yourself as a company. And that's what we're trying to do from the bottom up. Often people within the company will come up with an innovation, and if it's innovated out of them because of the rigidity of the company, you don't get any innovation coming at all. So there might be some guy working on the lathe, the CNC lathe, and suddenly he comes up with a new algorithm that can actually do something that nobody's thought of, and he's allowed to do that and bring it to the boss and talk about it. The problem with our society is that when people start businesses, they focus very much on the product. And if you do that, you'll have a Kodak moment, because what's happening off stage left is technology is constantly evolving. You think about what's happened in the music industry. You remember we used to have tape recorders and things like that, and that got disrupted. Think about what's happened in the lighting industry over the last 20 years. We used to have incandescent bulbs, then we had halogens. They lasted only about 15 years. Now we've got LEDs. Now, if you're in the business of making halogens, you're out of a business. So what we try and do is actually look at what's happening with the industry that we're in and planning innovation to be ahead of the game, and that takes creativity. And so what you need to do is look at your product in the context of, is it providing a customer statement of need that has longevity? Most of our products, for instance, are in the medical field, because that's going to go on forever, and also because they're embedded systems, which are the most regulatory controlled. So all the products that we make have to be approved by the FDA. So they've got these very, very stringent guys coming down, making sure that we do everything properly. But all our guys are coming up. We came up with a novel way. We had one of our manufacturing guys come to us and said, we're making all these different products and we put them into little rooms all on their own. And so but that room there is only used for making paracetamol or Codral in winter. I mean, it doesn't get used most of the time. What if we made one big room like this and we brought equipment into it and campaign manufactured, made what we needed to, and then pushed those bits of machinery back into those other rooms we weren't using them. And that's how we won in terms of we could respond much easier to the market trends in New Zealand. So if there's a flu pandemic, we could put all the machines in this room and make a whole heap of cold medicines, then push them out and then make something else the next day. So we changed the way that things were being done. So you've got to be innovative in your manufacturing technologies, innovative in the way that you manage your staff, and innovative in the way that you look at the external trends that are going to affect the world. And that's the important thing. If you think we're going to all have driverless cars in 2020, it ain't going to happen. And why won't it happen? Because we're human. Right now, the biggest risk in aircraft travel are the pilots, because they get bored. They've only got one little thing to do pretty much when they land. But we can do fly-by-wire and take that risk away. So we can have, absolutely, now, it would be safer to have pilotless planes. But none of you are going to get on a pilotless plane, are you? So are you going to get in a driverless car? I don't think you will, actually. I think you're... Because the laws of innovation are governed by a preset of premises that only 10% will be early adopters of any innovation. Then you have a bit of a long curve, and it's also driven by word of mouth, by the commonality of us. So we decide what we will accept in life. Right now we've got traffic lights, for instance, that can be pre-programmed for traffic control and have cameras in them that can speed up all of Auckland's traffic problems. But they're going to cost $250,000 per set of lights. I've no idea why, but that's what they're going to cost. And nobody wants to install them because there's a risk that that program might go wrong and it might need to be rebooted, whereas the current very manual things hardly ever go wrong. So adoption of technology is always slower than you think. So if you've got a new technology that you want to deploy, you have to have a look at the laws of diffusion of innovation. Diffusion of innovation will actually determine whether your product gets accepted or not. And the story I like to tell is that Mr. Birdseye, who invented Birdseye Foods, and he was fishing in the Arctic and pulled up this fish and it froze immediately in front of him. Useless. But he waited till the fall and it thawed out, and he cooked it and it was fantastic. So he invented flash freezing and it was brilliant. And he started a company. He focused on the product and he went bankrupt because nobody in those days had a fridge. So it was a waste of time. But 20 years later, when he reformed the company, it went gangbusters. And some people would argue that one of the things that predicates success, and a whole lot of guys at Stanford University did a survey on this and said that one of the most critical determinants for any company, startup company, is timing, the timing of that company. You know, is the timing of this technology right for society? I think that that's still an outcome. I think that if you do your proper customer statement of need, you'll know that it's the wrong time. You'll know that there aren't enough people with refrigerators. So I always focus on customer statement of need. And there were, 3 guys trolled out of their mind in Paris, and they had 3 problems. They had no local currency, they didn't know where they were, and they didn't know the number of the local cab company. So they formed Uber, which satisfied all of those 3 customer statement of needs. And they just saw that opportunity, and they did one thing that I'm passionate about, and that is daring to dream. It's just as easy to dream really, really big. So they dreamed global day one. And they've been very strategic about that. So they've only picked large cities where they know there's a whole workforce, and they've got a customer statement of need down really, really well.
There's Uber's a company that we've talked quite a lot about at Spark Lab. So the story goes to the world's largest taxi company, automotive brand, which is Uber, owns no taxis. The world's largest hotelier is Airbnb, and it owns no bedrooms. One of the world's largest media companies is Facebook, yet it owns no talent. Is New Zealand, are we applying our innovation and our thinking in the innovative space in the right way to form the next Ubers? Because we talk a lot about, we've got this sort of Kiwi number 8 ingenuity. Do you think, Sir Ray, we're applying it in the right way to be successful in the future?
Well, I think we're one of the most innovative countries in the world. I think in terms of basic creative, innovative natures, I think although we've been subject to that European resourced education system, those characteristics that we have are a rebuttal against that. We just really aren't pretty much fond of rules at all, so we just get on and crack on and do what we want to do. And there's always another guy in a shed who will say, I've got a bit of the story, part of the story that can help you get to where you want to go. And we talk to each other. And we do dream really, really big. And so I think we've got all of the landscape to do it. And in fact, I would argue on the world stage, if you all knew about the technology that comes out of New Zealand, you'd be ferociously proud, as I am. Because depending on whose metric you take, our innovation index is either 13 or 17 behind Switzerland. But what they use for determination of that innovation index is how many patents are filed and how many products are taken to market from those patents and so on. On the world stage, we publish as many papers as any other country in the OECD, perhaps more. And so, and patents and research papers. So we do okay in research. Getting products to market is another issue for us in terms of how you commercialise them. But to some degree, the metrics wrong, because in Switzerland, one of the things that contributes to those innovation index is that they've got 2,875 patents for one Swiss watch movement. And that gets put into why they're innovative. Whereas on the world stage, if you look at what we contribute, there are billions and billions of people around the world that are using Kiwi technology. that you guys don't know about. Sometimes you do. I mean, we all know that Weta Workshops, if you see any animation movies, then you've got, and that's a global success, you know, so you've got an animation company that is leading edge in any animation thing, and that just came out of a bunch of guys down in Wellington playing with cool stuff, and they were probably playing darts at lunchtime or playing guitars, but they thought differently about how they were going to do stuff. But if you tie this all together, one of the stories I think that's very New Zealand, which shows you what we can do on the world stage, is the story of Colin Murdoch. Who's heard of Colin Murdoch? Anybody? Okay, one person, yeah. So Colin Murdoch, he had his one moment of observation when he was writing a list, a shopping list, and the big pen he had stopped writing. So he got some matchsticks, sharpened them up, poked them down the end to get the last bit of ink out. When he was doing that, he thought, what if I made a piston out of plastic? I could invent the world's first plastic disposable hypodermic syringe. And he did, and that changed global healthcare. Because in 1957, when I was lined up at school in the orphanage, I was getting my BCG jab with a glass syringe, because that's what we used to use. We used glass syringes, and they were washed out and sterilised between patients. Now imagine the time that it took to do all of that. So all he did was change the materials of construction, and that allowed us to have global mass coverage of pandemics and stop AIDS and all those kind of things. So all he did was change the materials of construction, but he serviced the customer state of need. There were millions of people who needed vaccinations that couldn't have vaccinations because they had to build a factory local to where those people were getting those syringes. Because at the same time he was inventing it, I was in an orphanage in the UK, lined up with all the school in alphabetical order, getting a BCG jab. Not only did we have the same glass syringe, but the same needle. I was bloody glad my name was Avery, you know. Got 2 daughters, they're called Amelia and Anastasia, because these things stay with you. But the point is that he changed the world, and you can all do that. You can all come up with some little idea that actually will, if you think about what the customer needs and form a customer solution, if there's enough people with that problem, then you've got a success story. And everybody's doing it. Spark's doing it. If you look, Spark used to be a copper wire company, and now they're a total communication company. Who knows what they might do next? They may become a media company because they're innovating. And what they're doing is listening to their customer statement of need, and their customers' needs are changing. And for me, sometimes I have these little moments of observation and think, this is what really happened. Even I missed stuff. And the other day I was just cleaning out my drawer, and I pulled out about 4 Rolodexes, with business cards in them. And I realised that everything that I needed on those cards was actually on my computer. So the guys that make those Rolodexes are out of business. But I hadn't noticed that was happening. I just adapted to the technology of the day, and that's what we do. But sometimes going backwards in time, you can come up with another idea and say, well, what else could you add off? What else was on that business card that you put onto the computer? So maybe you come up with an app for your mobile phone. But just by watching what's happening in life and going around you, you're more likely to come up with an idea. But we're good at it, and we don't have this embedded stuff that when I talk about daring to dream, anybody in this room, this is unique to New Zealand, and this is why I want you to walk away with some sort of sense of power. There's nobody in this room who's under the age of 45, perhaps, who's reasonably easy on the eye, who could not be Prime Minister if they wanted to be. As long as you don't go around pulling people's hair, you'll be fine. But the point is you can. This is a country where you can dream to be anything you want to be. When I was living rough under the railway bridge in London, I wanted to own my own bicycle shop. Now I have an organisation that changes the lives of millions of people around the globe. And none of that would have happened if I hadn't come to New Zealand, because New Zealand allowed me to be the person that I wanted to be. And I'm ferociously proud to be a Kiwi, and I hope that you guys are too.
So Ray, we head into the final 5 minutes. Some of the questions coming through, and we'll split them into 2 camps, and they're both based around culture for teams. So one says, it's all very well to have an innovative ambition, but I don't own the company and I'm not the CEO of the company. But you talk about moments of inspiration. So they're not big technical charts with flow diagrams, rather it's just the power of observing. What would be your tip for the people in the room that don't own or run the business but want to start building an innovative culture within the organisation? Where would you start?
Well, what happens with our businesses is that, and the Japanese are very good at this, they have a production system in the Kaizen quality management system where they say that the next person next to you is your customer. And that's how they build quality into the product. So, not like the old days of Japanese quality where somebody stuck a QC approved on the end of it at the end of the whole process. Nobody checked it in the whole process. So the person next to you is your customer, and they're also the next opportunity for you to come up with an innovative idea. So if you see that them having a problem or you've got an idea for making things better, and sometimes it can come out of the blue. We had a cleaner in our room when we were doing a product realisation strategy for a new inhaler, and there was something about it I didn't like. There was just something I couldn't put my hands on, and she came in the room and I said, Margaret, what do you think of this? She didn't even know what it was, and she picked it up and said, why is it that shocking blue colour? And it was just, the blue was just wrong, and everybody else in quality assurance had said, oh, it's Air New Zealand blue, it looks like a medical device, it'll be fine. But everybody's got an opportunity to make a contribution to the company, and sometimes it comes from the bottom up, or, in fact, all innovation usually comes from the edge of society, because embedded societies don't work in terms of mass change. I call it the penguin syndrome. You've got a bunch of penguins all sitting together. The ones right in the middle of that group look at each other and say, what did you do today? Oh, my egg moved. Yeah, mine moved as well. Nothing else is happening. But at the edge of that society, some of them are swimming and playing into the water, and they can see other penguins over the other side, and they give them a wave, and before they know it, they start talking, and one sees one of them luge down in poo, and it goes much further in poo, apparently, and so they all develop poo luging. So innovation's that moment of observation and people learning from each other, but it doesn't have to be a hierarchical top-down. And again, I think sometimes these questions are embedded in fear. We are slow adopters of anything, so it's better almost to do nothing than to change things. And sometimes you get companies that are so embedded that they actually don't ever innovate, and they'll be the ones that'll be usurped by innovations around them, because it's a constantly moving target. And often what will happen is that companies that are very product-centric, making product to a fixed price, as competition comes in from China or from other people being more innovative with using technology to cut the cost of goods, they end up cutting cost of production or getting rid of staff, and finally that company will fold because it doesn't have a future. So you've got to be innovative if you want to be in the game forever.
So let's do then the flip of that question. For the people in the room that own or run those businesses, that perhaps before this morning were thinking, no, I've got a grown-up industry that I'm in, but we've heard now pharmaceutical can disrupt. So what's the one thing that someone could do this morning that starts to build a culture of innovation?
Well, I think it's about getting the team in, and firstly, one of the things that you have, I think, is that often there are these layers. If you want to see how Auckland Council works, it starts up there and it goes down here in terms of the layers of different groups. So try and get as flat a management system as you can, even if it's not, even if there's legislative stuff that says that you have to have all of these separate things as you do in the pharmaceutical industry. But what you can have is groups that meet to, increase the number of people in the room. That's the thing. Increase the number of people in the room who are dealing with products and product development, and get them to start talking to you. And even if they get clients in, it actually makes the clients feel, what we do is we get our techies in the room, not just the suits in the room when we're talking to people, because those techies, we're teaching them to talk simple language, to these people, because techies normally are talking in Esperanto. Nobody can understand what they're saying. So by having them in the room, we educate them to actually be the next marketing. The best people to sell technical stuff are technical people, but you have to train them to do that, and they start in the engineering shop or in the computer lab, and you actually train them up. And so it's getting them all in the room and actually having a career path that says we're all in it together, because that way, as I said, if things do get tough, you've got a whole pool of people rather than two guys in an office at the management group, and even have the board of that company come and do the walkthrough of the factory or the place, so they get a real sense of the team. So it's about believing. If you get it right, it's an amazingly powerful tool. Everybody in our organisation believes that they can change the world, and it's on the back of our cards. It simply says change the world, and there's not one person who doesn't get up in the morning and think that they can. And that's what makes us very powerful, because we have changed the world and we will change the world, and nobody's going to stop us.
Let's do a time check, because we're getting close, but questions are coming through reasonably thick and fast. Is it all right to roll on for slightly longer? No? Fantastic. So and then I'll open it to the floor if there's any other questions. So in that same vein of, that's some advice for people working in a company, there's some advice for people that are running or owning the company. Let's now go to parents. So you talked a little bit earlier about the schooling curriculum globally built for the Industrial Revolution, not for today. And yet that ain't going to change very quickly. But we've got people in this room will have young kids that are going through formative years. So again, the spirit of one tip, the thing that we could go home tonight and encourage our kids to do, what would that be?
Well, the first thing is, I think, educate them. It sounds silly, because you're sending them to school to get educated, but they're not being educated. Education is about knowledge. Education is about not knowing to put a tomato in a fruit salad. It's very simple stuff. And kids are open to. They're not worried about failure. In fact, next week I've got all my kids coming round to kids and their friends coming round to my place for Mr. Ray Science Day, and basically we just blow things up, and I don't want them to be scientists, but I want them to understand about, it's about the imagination. This is how bad it can get. There was an 8-year-old girl, and she was drawing a picture in an art class at school, and the teacher came up and said, "What are you drawing?" She said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher said, "You can't do that because nobody knows what God's like." So think about that. So she's wrong, because the education system says that nobody knows what God's look like. So she just carried on scribbling, and she said, "No, I've told you to stop because nobody knows what God looks like." She said, "They will in a minute." And that's why you need to educate kids. My kids, for instance, when I bought a little rocket, those $22.50 Science Lab rockets. You fill them full of vinegar and sodium bicarbonate and shake them up, and they produce CO2. And this one went, that was premature ejaculation. It was rubbish. And I said to the girls, "I'll make you a rocket." So I went out in the garage and I got a 44-gallon drum. I got the same rocket. I aerodated that on the top with 5-minute aerodite because I know that would get a really good seal. I had my little drill go in, 25 kgs of citric acid and some sodium bicarbonate. I had the girls, they had their goggles on, their swimming goggles. They were pressed against the side of the house because we'd written the name of the man on the moon on the side because I knew it was going to go over the fence at least, And I turned it on and the bloody drum exploded. And I was covered in foam. The whole house was covered in foam. They were covered in foam. Mum came out to see if they were dead, and I looked at the kids and I said, "You guys okay?" And they said, "That was fabulous, Dad. Do it again." And that's what they've got. Though your kids are already pre-programmed with imagination. All you've got to do is encourage it. You just need to nurture it and encourage it because they're getting the basic reading, writing stuff. But also it's about thinking, because if we don't do this, we're really in for a tough ride, because we're living in a society where we don't know what it's going to be like in 2050. And we're going to need all the imagination and creativity to get through this next millennium. And so it's going to take creative people to do that, but we're not educating creative people. It's not until you get to probably starting work for a company that you might have a chance. So as an employer, then that's your opportunity to give these guys a chance to... and we were talking earlier before about you learn from making mistakes. You learn not to put the Allen key in the chuck and turn the chuck on. You only do it once,
Questions from the floor? With a fast one. There's a microphone here.
Thank you. Just wanted to get your advice for those business owners and business managers that work extremely long hours. You spoke about planning, etc., but sometimes you get bogged down with long work days. What's your advice regarding that, please?
Well, I think one of the things that I talk about is being customer-centric, but often people misunderstand what that means. Is that in doing any product manufacturing, product development process, you've got to involve every customer in the business, and we tend to think about them as being just outside the front door. They're the customers, but the first customers in your life is actually your wife. okay? Because if you ain't got that right, then you can't function, okay? So the next customer are the people that you work with. And so what we've done to sort of mitigate, we don't try and leave anybody behind. So when somebody's leaving my office, they'll leave. What we do with the staff is we make them know that they're revered, we value their opinion. They've got rules around what they have to do in terms of what we expect them to do, and they must follow those rules. But we want them to know that they're very important customers in our whole customer compendium. So the way that we don't lose them and lose track of what they're feeling is that we do this thing. In fact, I do it with my wife every night before we go to bed, you know, not what you're thinking. But we just turn to each other and say, give me 3 adjectives to describe me and my performance as your boss today, or your colleague, or whatever. And it's very powerful. You know, so if somebody's leaving my office and they say inspirational, clever, thoughtful, then I feel, okay, I've done a good job. But if they're leaving and they say clever, inspirational, complex, then I'll have them in the next day and find out what complex means, because they may have worked long hours and I haven't noticed. You know, and therefore they feel miffed that I haven't noticed that they've put more effort in. So it's about trying to get closer to your staff in a proper way to understand what their feelings are. And you can't keep in the pharmaceutical industry, because our guys were working from typically 8 till 8 every day. So what we did was we recognised that there were issues that would fall over onto the family. So we would have the senior management guys would have almost a PA that would get their dry cleaning done, service the car for them, collect their shopping from Food Town, deliver it to mum at home, because we saw that was an investment in and that their lunch was delivered to their desk, because that meant they could spend longer at their desk. So, and they liked it because they got rewarded, and they got rewarded at the end of the year with bonuses that reflected the success of the company. So it's about working with all of your customers and understanding that they are. And if we did that, we wouldn't have such a disrupted world in terms of people not being happy. So think about, you know, if they are working long hours, ask them for a solution as well. So what would fix that? You know, share the problems that you've got. I mean, that's half the battle is if they know the balance sheet, they can share why you can't do certain things. And why they have to work long hours, then they feel they share the burden of what the company's doing. But often you'll find that they'll come up with a really cool idea of how you might be able to mitigate some of those problems.
Fantastic. Any others? One of them, Ray, is for you, what's been your biggest challenge and or opportunity as being a scientist in business? And do you describe, are you a scientist?
I can be whatever I want.
Well, let's pretend you are.
Yeah.
If you were a scientist, what's been one of the greatest challenges for you in business?
I don't think I ever see things as challenges. I like to think, I think one of the things that I've developed over the years is almost a Buddha-esque perspective of life, and that is that Buddhists believe that, it's not turning into a religious sermon, but Buddhists believe that great happiness and great sadness are both imposters. And so if you understand that, then when the shit hits the fan, I mean, a good example was we were in Eritrea at the end of the 30-year war, and the MiGs came over and bombed a big warehouse which had all of our ducting that we could use to make this factory completed, this sterile Class 10,000 clean room. And it was all munted and all gone. And my boys, my band of brothers, were downstairs, and I treated them like sons. And they were looking up at Dad, because Dad was pacing up and down in this office. I didn't know what to do. I was making up my mind whether I was going to send them off through the Sudan. It was going to take 6 months, get stuff fabricated. They couldn't fly out because of the war. And I didn't know what to do. So I do what I normally do in those situations is I drink half a bottle of whiskey. Now, I find that takes the edge off. But it's the slowing down process. It's actually like having a fag. You just drink something and sit there. And while I was doing that, these guys took off in the middle of the night with their pop rivet guns, their utes. And when I woke up in the morning, the whole yard was covered in these big sheets of aluminium sheeting. And I knew there was no aluminium sheeting in the whole country. And they were bending it and forming it. They made their own metal formers, and they were making ductwork. And when I walked across the quad downstairs to find out where they got this stuff from, I could see that they were grinding off the motorway sign to Keren. The bastards have been out all night knocking off all the motorway signs for the whole country. It was in Time magazine because they thought it was something to do with the invasion. It was just a bunch of Kiwis who didn't give a shit. They wanted to solve a problem for Dad, and they did. And if you go into that factory today, you'll see all this very state-of-the-art stainless steel ductwork, all ISO 10,000 approved and so on. But it's got one little aluminium plaque on it with all the handwritten names of all these guys that built that factory, because they acted as a team. They had a problem and they solved that problem because they were Kiwis. They've got no respect for the status quo and they wanted to look after Dad. And so that's how powerful teams can be.
Wonderful. Oh, wait, last question.
Yeah, I'm just wanting to pick up on the thing that you mentioned about the power of us and thinking about diversity, about who is quite often in the room and who isn't. And don't really know what my question is, but wondering if you can talk about diversity and the whole human continuum around diversity, around gender, ethnicity, ability, age. Yeah, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we published a book about 2 or 3 years ago called The Power of Us, and we went around New Zealand trying to find out what made us different as a country. And that's when we discovered that it wasn't this number 8 fence environmentality, it was just a state of mind, that we do have these characteristics, that we're not fond of rules and we dream really big. So I bet if we said to this group assembled here, because in this room there's a whole bunch of talent, and one of the things that I think the Spark Lab's trying to do is to get a sort of national connectivity. What I know is that there are about 450,000 small businesses in New Zealand with a staff of less than 50 people. And by and large, that's actually where the innovation starts. Innovation doesn't start in, it used to start in big multinational organisations who had a pipeline, to innovation. But now the MO of those big companies is usually to get a start-up company and buy it, because they've actually developed their own novel technology. And it's because people talk to each other. 2 guys suddenly come up with a really cool idea, or 3 guys trotted out their mind in Paris come up with an idea, or somebody sitting in their bedroom at home and they're broke. Sometimes lack of money is a stimulation, and they're broke and they think, we could rent out this room. And they start an internet company where you can share your bed with anybody, blah, blah, blah. So, but I think what we need to do is to try and connect those dots by having some machinery to do that, and I think that's the beginning of what Spark's trying to do. Almost there's an opportunity for somebody here who's got some media comms skills. I came up with an idea a few years ago, which we never pursued because we had too many other things on the boil, which was simply to have the New Zealand Knowledge Bank, which was to connect people, particularly those small businesses who didn't even have websites, and get them with a shingle that would be equivalent to Trade Me. So anybody who could put a Trade Me ad could actually put up their shingle. And you could connect the dots, because there's always somebody looking for one of your services and they don't know that they exist. So somehow we need to get that communication, that pipeline much more sophisticated. But again, in New Zealand, we are in this disruptive part of the world, because we communicate far better as this. We've only got about 17 people per square kilometre in New Zealand, compared with 350 people per square kilometre in Switzerland. So you could argue on one hand that that's a big problem when you're coming to marketing, but it's actually quite a good thing when you look at all the innovation that comes out of New Zealand. And also that spirit that we have that no other country has. When we won the World Cup, I was ferociously proud to be a Kiwi, because I knew that not only did we win the World Cup against that metastatistical analysis that we shouldn't win it, but when the final whistle blew, we actually invented that as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this morning. Some of the feedback we always get on Sir Ray is, we can come to talks like this morning and say, look, innovation's all good and well, but you don't understand. My business is X and Y, and it's complicated because A and B. But to do it with pharmaceuticals, to do it around the world, to do it in developing countries, to do it in economies like New Zealand, suggests that none of us have an excuse not to dream big. And if part of your talk is about the power of observation, sometimes it takes a morning like this morning, we can reflect on some of the amazing opportunities we have around us. So if you wouldn't mind joining me as a token of appreciation to Sarai. And as in the spirit of a small token of appreciation, a small gift, Sarai, on behalf of Spark again,
Chris.
for your continued support for what we're trying to do here. Okay. And a unapologetic plug to anyone in the room that's a Spark customer. And a most heartfelt thank you to you. And the reason I say that is the only reason that talks like this morning have happened. And as I say, they've happened now 150 occasions, is because there's a Spark customer in the room that said that would be interesting and helpful. And a second Spark customer said, you should do it more often. And as a consequence, we now take it on the road. So we're here for another 48 hours, then we move through to Tauranga, then we're in Wellington, then we're in Christchurch, then we're in Dunedin. And so if you found this morning helpful and you're a Spark customer, thank you very much for making it possible. On your Mobi site that you used to come in, there's a feedback panel. So we would love to know if indeed you've enjoyed this morning, if there's anything that we could do differently, if you think that we should come back. If we come back, what sort of events and speakers should we bring with us? Because with that feedback, we promise we will. There are 2 more talks at Spark Lab before we leave. One is at 10:30 this morning, and that came from a request on a particular topic, which was social media, with a question that says, I know social media is important, my children are doing it, some of my work colleagues are doing it, but I really don't know where to start. Or if I have started, how to do it better. So there's a workshop at 10:30 this morning, and then this evening there's another talk by a wonderful speaker who's entertaining, who's lighthearted, but it's a master series in business development and how to take that big step for growing your business. So you're most welcome to come to either of those. So again, our huge thank you for you that have joined this morning, to our wonderful speaker, Sarai. Please follow us online. There's a social media feed that's gone through live this morning, and for those that have dialed in live, wonderful to have you with us. The website of Spark Lab is designed to do exactly what Sarai's talked about, which is connect. So if you've got an idea for a business and you're looking to connect with someone else, that's a forum to be able to do it. If you're looking for some publicity or some partners, that's a forum to be able to do it. The Spark hubs in your local areas are again a forum to be able to say, if you need some help and you think Spark might be able to help, please go along and visit. We hope to see you back. Thank you.